We need to empower people with not just the philosophical tools, but the inspiration to break free from the system.
Welcome to the flagship Lions of Liberty podcast, your weekly dose of education, inspiration, and real-world application from the top minds in the liberty movement.
If you want liberty, we need to be better leaders, better husbands, better fathers, better friends, better businessmen. We need to be better people.
Here's your host, your guide, your shining beacon of liberty, Marc Clair.
Live long and live free.
Well, hello, my Liberty Kitty Cats, and welcome back to the flagship Lions of Liberty podcast here on what is now known as the Lions of Liberty Network, or you might be listening to this on the solo Lions of Liberty with Marc Clair feed. We've talked about this for a couple weeks now. We actually have a whole episode on the Lions of Liberty Network feed explaining this, but basically you have a couple options now. You can either just subscribe to the Lions of Liberty Network, get all three of these shows, or if you happen to like one of ours more than another or something like that, or want to get some extra content, something that each of us are going to do on our own through those individual feeds, you can also choose to subscribe to one of our feeds. So you can check out Lions of Liberty with Marc Clair. That is my personal feed. You can check out Electric Liberty Land with Brian McWilliams, John Odermatt with Finding Freedom. It's all there available. We just have given you more options, essentially. So that is part of our kind of our growth plan for 2022. You are going to be seeing some changes along the way, and one of those changes is going to be right here on the flagship show. This is one of the last episodes that I recorded in 2021. So I'm considering my first episode that I actually record this year, which is coming up very shortly. And I'm not going to mention who it's with because let's just say I want to make sure I don't get Schneidered first, if you know what I mean. And longtime fans will know what I mean. But really, I just want to kind of have a little bit of a different feel, a different vibe to the show, a different kind of guest that I'll be bringing on. And you're going to see that sort of, I guess what we can call a soft relaunch 2 weeks from today, because that'll be the first interview that I have actually recorded in 2022. The first interview where you'll see different graphics on the video if you're watching the video versions of these shows, which you can find. I recommend finding them on Odyssey. We all know our time on YouTube is very, very limited, so please do subscribe to the Lions of Liberty Odyssey channel if you want to check out the video shows. And of course, as always, you can check out these interviews live by becoming a supporter of Lions of Liberty, either on Patreon at patreon.com/Lions of Liberty, or now on Locals as well over at lionsofliberty.locals.com. That being said, let's get to roaring, shall we?
My guest today is long overdue to appear on this program. He is the founder and CEO of Crash and the founder of Praxis, two great companies which help people pursue careers in really innovative ways. We'll get to that in a little bit. He's also the host of a podcast by his own name, the Isaac Moorehouse Podcast. I'm very pleased to welcome Isaac Moorehouse. Isaac, first things first, are you ready to roar?
Oh, I'm absolutely ready to roar. I was born ready.
Yes, I kind of figured you would be, Isaac. And it is your first time here, so why don't we just take it from the top? I mean, why don't you go take us way back, as far back as you want, maybe all the way back to baby Isaac, and give us some insights on just how you got started down this path of, I normally say like how you got down this path towards having interest in the ideas of liberty. I think for you, it's more than just interest in the ideas. One thing I love about you, it's not just interest, it's action. And the action you've been taking has certainly created more liberty in your own lives and the lives of others. And that's something I really look to emphasize, especially in the last year or so here. So how did this all start for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it did absolutely start with the ideas for me. And it took me a long time before I kind of realized the need to put my energy into building alternatives, into entrepreneurship as a way to advance liberty. But the motivating drive has been from day one, from I would say my early to mid teens, to make people free, starting with myself. And that's what really, that is my core passion in life. And everything I've done, has come out of that. So I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan. You see my Detroit Tigers hat. I'm also a Detroit Lions fan. It's very depressing.
I'm a Bills guy, so I get
oh,
it.
good. Well,
although it's not too bad lately.
Because look, I got to tell you, these libertarian types, man, they're not too good on the sports stuff. They'll call it sports ball and other cringy stuff like that. It's like, come on. Simulated voluntary warfare and voluntarily having irrational collectivist patriotism. That's great. because that's how you channel that stuff in non-destructive ways. So anyway,
Totally.
little
I think like sports at their core are, I don't know if I want to say they're libertarian, but they're certainly enriching to the athletes. They can be enriching to the fans that watch them. But I think especially over the past several years, so many sports and the coverage of the sports have been overtaken by wokeness and things that really should have nothing to do with the sports themselves. So I think that even more so, that's created more of a kind of an anti-sports reaction in a lot of people, even in myself. Like sports that I used to enjoy, it's cringe to watch them sometimes.
It's so bad. I remember the NBA finals in the bubble. It was so cringe. Everything about it was weird. There was
I couldn't watch sports that year. I could not. I realized I could not watch sports that
fast. That was probably the least I've watched in forever. But I think sports are one of the things that make a free society rich and full and function really to channel again some of those collectivist impulses, which can be dangerous, into something that's not dangerous. So anyway, I'm a big fan, and it is really sad.
That is actually an important insight. I know we don't intend to talk about sports for an hour, but I mean, it's when you talk about channeling that collective instinct, because one thing I've talked about a lot lately, like that, the idea of like worshiping something or that like tribalism and being connected to a tribe, it is kind of in us. And even as libertarians, if we say we want to reject that, like we're these rugged individuals, we can say that all we want, but we're still humans and we still end up defaulting back to tribalism. You even see it within the Libertarian Party, within factions forming or just the libertarian movement in general. It's somewhat ingrained in us to find our tribe and kind of cling on to that tribe. So if it's going to happen anyway, it may as well happen in something as relatively harmless as sports as opposed to through government.
Yeah, it's funny, and I promise I will get back to my story. But
I love tangents. This is tangents of liberty as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly.
So
it's funny. I was just talking to my wife about this. She was like, she's like, it's so. Oh, she goes, but you're cheering for the Lions to win because I'm a lifelong Lions fan. But didn't you like pick against them in your fantasy football thing? And I'm like, yeah, but you don't understand the hierarchy of sports fandom, honey. It goes your team. That's what you want above everything else, and then next, maybe it's your fantasy team, or maybe it's your conference or your division. And then you want your rivals to lose. And there's this sort of rank ordering of what you cheer for as a fan. Right. And she's like, it just seems dumb. Why are you still a Lions fan? And I said, you don't understand. Look, it's
ingrained.
There's something noble and necessary and really valuable about loyalty. And as a libertarian and as a radical individualist and as a radical anti-collectivist, that's a very dicey thing. You can very easily feel like, well, no, it's irrational to be loyal to anything and to have any sense of collective identity and whatever. And I think largely in today's world, that is a good impulse to start with. Like that is a correct assessment. Most of the time you're trying to be manipulated by people through appeals to collectivism and school spirit and all this other bullshit. So rejecting that and understanding and thinking like an individual, I think is really, really powerful. But you begin to see, and we're seeing right now more than I've ever seen in my lifetime, there's this huge surge towards sort of traditionalism and like religion. And because they've sort of looked at what happens when there's none of it, and they're sort of freaked out. And so they're scrambling and they're looking in all kinds of crazy ways. And some of that is dangerous and some of that is good and necessary. And so, being grounded properly in a sense of, let's say, shared identity with other individuals, which can happen in a community or a sports team or a religion or whatever. Being properly grounded in a sense of loyalty, not one that is a blind obedience to an arbitrary authority. Those things can create the kind of stability and order and predictability that makes society functional. Like you can't have everything be you need some sense of cohesion and predictability. You don't want the use of force in any of that, and you don't want people to turn off their minds. And so when I think of I was born in Michigan and I grew up watching the Lions as a kid, and my relatives were Lions fans, so there's this emotional appeal, but it's also a choice. I choose to allow myself to suffer emotionally for the Lions losing because right. I am voluntarily entering into this type of play. Mm-hmm. It's like, I know it doesn't have real world stakes, but I choose to actually care enough to let it make me grumpy for a whole day sometimes.
Yeah.
Because
and when you're watching,
wait, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, like, when you're watching a game like that and you're really into it, even if it doesn't have real world stakes, your mind doesn't know that. Like, when you get enough into a game or a movie, your mind doesn't know that you're even in a movie. It basically, you react in the same exact emotional way, which is why it can ruin your day when you lose the big game, even if you were just sitting on your couch.
Absolutely. And there's a sense in which that allows you to build certain types of character traits, and I would even say integrity sometimes, in a like simulated or relatively safe environment. So if I can stick with my team and they're still my team through all this kind of stuff, even though it costs me emotionally in some sense, I'm developing the positive version of loyalty, right? Or commitment, or keeping to my own, promises, or my own goals for myself or whatever. There's something in there that I think is actually really valuable. There's a character trait on a sports team. You absolutely understand what I'm talking about. Being a fan is slightly more removed, but you still get some of it. You get to kind of practice that. Whereas somebody who only ever picks, oh, I'm going to root for this team now, and then I'm going to switch to this team, then I'm going to switch to this team all the time. There's something, it doesn't really matter in terms of sports. We make fun of them as a bandwagoner, but there's something that they're missing, an opportunity to develop a type of resilience as just a person, which I think when shit hits the fan in the real world can actually matter, can actually be valuable. So anyway, that's a crazy little diatribe.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. It's very similar. I mean, not very similar, but sort of similar, like sports and religion, in the sense of, especially like in high school, I was on the wrestling team and I got my ass kicked for years. Like, I got my ass beat, but I got back up every time. And one of my most memorable wrestling matches was one where I got my ass beat, but I didn't get pinned. And by not getting pinned, my team won that matchup, won the entire match, because we only lost by 1 point. We would have lost by, or we only won by 1 point, would have lost by 2 if I got pinned. So like stuff like that teaches you lessons about like teamwork and, not giving up, not just for yourself, but for the I hate to say it, the greater good of that team, of that voluntary team that you're a part of. And I think it's sort of like in our instinct as libertarians to like reject group mentality. But I think it's all about the context. Like, group think and group mentality when it comes to certain things is can certainly be a negative. It can certainly lead society down some very dangerous paths. But when it's a voluntary thing for a group cause, that level of sacrifice, which is something you can also find in the practices of many religions, whether it's Lent or Yom Kippur, like every religion has an element of sacrifice. Yep. And whatever it is, whether it's sacrifice for a sports team, sacrifice for a religion, whatever, it does build character. It does make you stronger in difficult times. And boy, we're certainly looking at some difficult times right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so
anyway,
grew up in Michigan, and I was homeschooled as a child. And when I was 3, my dad was in a car accident, and he was in a coma for a while. He ended up coming home, but to this day, he's in a wheelchair. He has no short-term memory. He requires pretty much constant care. And so that was my reality growing up. Was, my mom was homeschooling me and my 2 siblings and taking care of my dad, and there was home health aides in the house. And so kind of by necessity, I had a lot of independence. So my homeschooling was like borderline unschooling. I mean, we took classes and played on sports teams, and there was a very, very heavy social element. But it was like we had household chores, and then our schoolwork was like mostly our responsibility. And, I did as little as I could get away, as little as I could. Played a lot of Legos, and then played a lot of sports, and always worked, always had jobs from a very young age. So when I was about 14, I wanted to go to a local private high school because they had a better basketball team, and some of my friends who had been homeschooled started going there. So I went there for 1 year, and it was a lot of fun. But I was like, this is such a waste of time. I got to be here 5 days a week, and like every class is the exact same length of time, even though some people need a lot longer, some people time at all. We're all on the exact same schedule. It's so like I couldn't have time to work and make money like I was used to doing. And I just thought, this is just too corralled. Like I want more autonomy, more control. So I went there for my sophomore year, and then my junior and senior year of high school, I went to community college for like 3 days a week, 2 days a week. And then I worked the other days and paid my way through, transferred my credits, and went to a 4-year big generic state university, Western Michigan University.
So you're going to college while in high school?
Yeah, basically. And then I worked, I worked 2-3 days a week, and then 18 credit hours a semester into the other 2 days a week or whatever. And so I got my bachelor's when I was like 19, and the whole time I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I paying for this? It really bothered me. I couldn't quite figure out. Everyone's like, you have to get a degree or you won't get it. But I was like, well, everybody says this. I guess it's true. Most jobs say degree required. But why the hell is that the case? Like, what is this actually doing? You're certainly not learning anything here. Nobody wants to be here. The professors don't want to be here. The students don't want to be here. They're dumber than a bag of rocks. They're lazy. They don't try to, like, I was so unimpressed with the whole experience. And I'm like, why? And I kind of stumbled into basically the signaling theory of education, that you're not really there to learn. You're there to purchase a signal. And I remember having this epiphany, like, okay, all I'm really buying is a piece of paper that tells the world I'm likely to be no worse than everyone else that has the same piece of paper.
You know, probably like follow instructions.
Right. The average Western Michigan University degree holder is not really anything to write home about. So I had that epiphany, and I had this frustration. I was like, I want to build something that's like an institution, a college, or something that helps people transition into the professional world. That's like no wasted time or money, the most efficient way possible. And I had a couple ideas, but I didn't know what to do with it. I was 19. So I kind of just put that on the back shelf of my brain and went about my career. Now, in my career, all I really cared about was not doing things that I hated and advancing liberty. I grew up in a conservative, kind of Christian conservative. So had like an appreciation for low taxes, free markets, generally speaking, but didn't, was socially conservative as well. I think my brother told me, he's 2 years older than me. He said it was the first year he was going to vote. He was 18. He was going to vote in a presidential election. And he said, I'm voting for Harry Brown. And I was like, who's Harry Brown? He's like, oh, go here. Cause he had heard him on some radio show or something. And then I came across Milton Friedman, and I read, not Free to Choose, but Capitalism and Freedom. And that blew my socks off, because I was like, I was already predisposed. I already believed in free markets and all that stuff. But when he was making the case against medical licensure laws, against drug laws, against prohibitions on prostitution.
Stuff which you probably took for granted at the time, because that's
totally
kind of normal society agrees on this stuff.
Yeah. And I was a conservative Christian. And so like, I was like, well, I think that, certainly drug abuse is not good for you and is immoral, and prostitution is not something that I looked at as some wonderful thing. And the idea that the separation what's moral and what's legal, which of course everybody has when it comes to certain things. Oh, it was heroic to hide Jews from the Nazis. Of course, that's morality and legality are different. But then you just kind of forget that, right? When it comes to these social things. And so that was this radical thing to me. And I was like, holy crap. And like, I remember thinking, well, if markets work, then they work. And this is essentially the case that Friedman's making. Like, if I trust them to deliver, groceries better than governments getting involved in regulating that and all that stuff, then why not everything else? And why, like, the kind of bootleggers and Baptist phenomena that you get with the drug war? Like, I hadn't seen that before. I hadn't thought of that before. The idea that the outcomes are, it's going to be worse. You're not going to get rid of sin by outlawing it, and you are going to enrich a bunch of crappy people. So that was this huge challenge that. And I was very much into just on my own, just reading a lot of philosophy, theology, political philosophy. I had always been very heavy in studying the Bible, and I was a big fan of C.S. Lewis. And this was, again, age 16-ish. And the combination, this is so weird, but like the Bible and C.S. Lewis, along with the seed planted by Milton Friedman, basically led me to first libertarianism.
So
first libertarianism, and then anarchism, because I just ran out of excuses. Like, I didn't want that to be true. I was like dragged kicking and screaming that, like, well, you can't morally or practically use the state to do this or this or this or this. And I'm like, well, shit, what does that leave? And like, eventually I just ran out. I couldn't come up with any valid, sound argument, either morally or practically, to do anything at all. And that was like very uncomfortable at first because I didn't want that to be true. It's very inconvenient,
All right, gang. Well, you know what is not inconvenient, meaning it is very convenient? That is investing with our friends over at itrust.capital. These guys are the number one best place to invest in cryptocurrencies for your future. You can protect those gains, protect that growth by investing through their traditional IRA structure. And there is just no better place to buy cryptocurrencies to pay the lowest fees to get the most competitive rates. In fact, if you join right now through our affiliate link, they are waiving their monthly fees. You're not even going to pay monthly fees for this service. So head over to itrust.capital/lions. Guys, if that all wasn't enough, I have something else for you. That's right. They're now going to give you $100 in Bitcoin when you sign up again using our link. That is itrust.capital/lions. Invest in your future, protect yourself, and don't let the tax man get a hold of them gains.
I find it interesting that you put it that way, that you don't want it to be true, because I think in many ways it's easier for us to, it would be easier if things as we are told are true. If it's just like, yeah, true. You go to college and then everything works out perfect and you don't have to worry about anything, or all these myths we hear about education, about government. Of course, it would be so much easier, maybe not easier in reality, but at least easier on our psyche if it just turned out to be true, if we weren't lied to our whole life. And it is a feeling of discomfort when you start to realize like, oh, like everything I've been told is kind of bullshit. And I kind of need to start learning my own path here, because what they're all telling me is nonsense. As much as it would be easier just to stay in that mentality, that uncomfortableness is kind of a necessary step to blaze a different kind of path.
Yeah. And it took me a long time, to where now I'm like, I'm so glad that this is the reality, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But it was very uncomfortable at the time. Like, it took me a long time to sort of see, I guess what I kind of call Hayekian or as an ass. Oh, sorry, I bounced for a second. The understanding that all of the things that we like most about life and society are already anarchic, and that like the heavy lifting of order and peace and prosperity in society is all being done by free market forces, and all the shitty stuff, not all of it, but much of it is the state's attempts to intervene. And so for me, it was like, at first it was like, oh my gosh, well, I can't justify this morally. So I guess I have to believe that this is wrong, but that's a really painful, uncomfortable, awkward belief. And man, it makes life hard. And now I just don't see it that way. Now it's like, look, freedom is responsible for pretty much everything good in our lives. And I just want to expand that. I just want more of that. I want to build the good parts of the world so that they crowd out the bad parts, instead of sitting there and labeling immoral, wrong, this is, and then trying to tear down those bad things, which is what was my initial approach. That is really depressing, and that is really hard. And you eventually either go crazy or you give up and you turn in and sell out. Like those basically what happens. Like politics. Okay.
Oh, there you are.
Are we back?
I lost you for a minute. Yeah, I lost you for probably 30, 40 seconds.
I'm having some rural internet issues today. So anyway,
it's
sorry.
part of the charm, It's part of living in the world.
Exactly.
It's not often that my Mexican internet is actually doing better than my guests. So it's kind of a nice change of pace, oddly enough.
No, so I mean, I fell in love with the ideas of liberty, and I came across Foundation for Economic Education. Back then, they had this really janky website, and they had these audio clips. This was like before video wasn't even on the internet to speak of. And I would listen to these audio clips of evenings at Fee, these different lectures from people, everyone I could get. And I would read every article I could come across by Leonard Reed, the founder of Fee. Frederick Bastiat's That Which Is Seen, That Which Is Unseen was just absolutely life-changing for me. And then I got into Mises. I came across the Mises Institute, and I read like almost everything by Hayek and Mises, like literally all their books. Then I got into Menger. I went really deep. Eventually did like a master's of history of economic thought from like a heavy Austrian program. while I was working. But I was just super into the ideas of liberty. It fired me up. I was passionate about it. But all this happened like in college, and then when I got out of college, my first job out of college, I worked in state government. I worked in the state legislature because I was like, okay, I want to expand freedom. The things keeping people from being free are, government policies. I guess you got to change those. You got to get into politics. And man, that was a huge error. And it took me a couple years to figure that out. Being there, working in the state legislature, seeing how the sausage got made. I mean, I could tell you stories for hours about how like just absurdly corrupt and stupid and impotent and it all is. Like politics is not where you go to make change.
What about one story? You got just one story?
Yeah, okay. One story. There was one point at which I controlled like 12 votes in the Michigan House of Representatives. And that's not like, oh, this is great. It's just a reflection of how stupid the process is. So you'd have votes.
What do you mean by controlled?
Well, I'll tell you. So on the House floor, they're voting on all these bills, and during a session, sometimes they'll vote on like 100 bills, and the bills are going up, and all the state representatives are like milling about, chatting with each other, chatting to the media, online, on eBay, buying shit. They're not paying any attention. They don't know what's in any of these bills at all. And they're like, how am I supposed to vote? And they kind of just look around, and their party usually tells them or whatever. Well, I worked for this guy who had like negotiated that I could be on the floor. Staff were not supposed to be on the floor, but I was on the floor because basically he just, whatever, he helped get all stupid political stuff. So anyway, I'm on the floor, and he would always talk to the media the whole time. He'd sit over at the media table and just like talk with them and whatever. And he said, okay, you just sit here as the votes come up, and then you just tell me, I don't want to have to pay attention. You tell me if I vote yes or no. And he happened to be like a libertarian guy, which is why I was working for him. But he said, if they expand government, it's a no. If they shrink government, it's a yes. If it's unclear, just make it a no. And so I would go to the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. They had a thing called MichiganVotes.org, and they would have really short summaries of bills, because that was the only way. You couldn't tell from the bill itself what the hell it did or what was in it. I mean, these are hundreds of pages. They're full of all kinds of stuff. So I'd go to MichiganVotes.org. A bill would come up, House Bill 6122. I would quickly pull it up, and you only have like a minute or two that like the roll is open, you can vote. And I'd be like scanning the description, and it would say, this bill undoes a previous provision that provided funding for this thing. This is now undoing it. And you're like, oh, good, it cuts funding. And then it would say, but then there's an amendment to redo it with more, so you got to figure out really quick. I'm like, okay, this is spending money to go to some tart cherry commission or some bullshit, right? And so I would just be like, no, I put my thumb down, and the representative would run over and press the no button. Well, he was sitting with all these guys who were kind of like conservative Republican types from West Michigan, which is more.
Is there literally a button? Like a no button?
Yeah, there's literally a button. They have like their chairs, and there's like a green button and a red button. Then it shows up on the big booth, like the name of the rep in red or green, based on what they voted on.
Oh, you mean for their vote? Not like, I thought it was like a communicated button, like I'm going to send a message to these people.
No, for their vote. So I would just tell him what to vote, and then he would run over and press it. Because it's some kind of like horrible crime if I touch that button. It's like you get like taken out in handcuffs. But so eventually all these other guys were like, wait a minute, Leon always knows. Leon, what is this bill? What should we vote on? This is the guy I work for. And he'd be like, Isaac says it's a no. And they were all kind of like roughly. This
kid says it's bad.
Right. They were like limited government conservatives. So they would all just start to do, whatever Leon's doing. So like at one point, my thumb, if it was a thumbs up, it'd get like 12 votes yes. If it was a thumbs down, it'd get like 12 votes no.
Your first job, essentially, and you are deciding what these like seasoned congressmen or senators are.
Well, here's what's crazy about it, right? These votes were all meaningless because the bills, everybody already knows what's going to happen with every bill in these things, because they already went through committee, they already came out. And so the Speaker of the House, the only reason they're doing them is because they already know the outcome and they know what's going to pass and what's not. And they don't need, unless it's a really controversial bill where it's going to be really close and they need a particular number of votes or whatever, they don't really care. It's not changing the outcome. When it is controversial, this is where it gets really ugly. And this is how you see why you can never make the world more free through politics, ever. You can only lose your own soul. You can't save anyone else's. We have instances. Let's say there's a bill to, let's say it's a tax increase, and you have At the time, there was a slight Republican majority in the House when I was there. So you have the Democrats over here. They're all going to vote yes on it because they want it for some reason. They're going to give money to the teachers' unions or some shit. The Republicans are pretty much all going to vote no, but there's a few exceptions, right? And so let's say that they need this bill to pass, or let's say the bill's not going to pass anyway, okay? Because this is an instance I can think of specifically. So this is a tax increase and it's not going to pass. So you got all these Democrats that are going to vote yes, and you got all these Republicans, most of whom are going to vote no. And there's a certain number of Democrats who have to vote no on it because they're in a district that's very tightly contested. Most districts are 100% Republican, 100% Democrat. There's no real, you don't need to like do anything to win as that party in most districts. But there are some that are tightly contested where it's a very close race. And so those battleground districts, if you're running as a Democrat, the Republican can use against you that you voted for a tax increase, and that might actually work. And so let's say there's 10 Democrats who are like, we need to vote no on this thing. And you've got similarly a handful of Republicans who are like, we need to vote yes on this or we'll lose our election. So what happens is you need this thing to pass if you're the Speaker of the House, because you've made all these bargains and agreements. Okay, we'll let you pass this bill. You let us pass this bill. You got all this crazy stacking up of these bargains. You need it to pass, and it's going to pass, right? Okay, I said it wasn't, but let's just play this. It's a tax increase. It's going to pass. You are a conservative Republican, let's say you're a libertarian running as a Republican, or it doesn't matter. You're in a really safe district.
If you're in office, you're probably a Republican if you're a libertarian.
Yeah, you're going to win no matter what you vote because your constituents, like, you're not facing any Democratic threat, whatever. So the Speaker of the House comes to you and says, hey, look, this tax increase is going to pass one way or the other. You can vote no against it, and it's not going to change it. It's going to pass. So your vote doesn't change a thing. However, if you vote no, this other Republican is going to have to vote yes because we promised the Democrats that we would do this in order for them to do this other thing, blah, 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 blah. This other Republican, he's moderately limited government. And if he votes yes, he might lose his election. That might hurt him. He might lose his election, and then the Democrats will have the majority. And they're bigger government than we are. So if you want to be selfish and say, I voted no on a tax increase and let it pass anyway, go ahead. And then your colleague who's going to be forced to vote yes, he could lose his election and be replaced by someone who's even worse. And so by selfishly voting yes and having a clear conscience, the bill's still going to pass, and we're going to lose majority to the party who's even bigger government than we are. So you're going to grow the size of government by sticking to your conscience. And you got to look all those people in the eye. You work with them all day, every day. And you got to say, I'm going to vote yes anyway because it makes my conscience feel good. Sorry, you're going to lose your election. And I don't care. And they're all going to see you as a backstabber, right? And the outcome will be as they predicted. The tax increase will still pass, and that guy will be replaced by a worse guy. And so that's what you face all the time. There is no way to be principled in politics. You can't. And if you go down that road and you say, okay, I'll do the lesser of two evils. I'll vote for the tax increase. And that is just as slippery of a slope because that shit never ends. And before you know it, you're an evil piece of shit doing all kinds of horrible things because you're good at politics. You can't be good at politics and a good person at the same time. I'm sorry. It's just not possible. So I saw that kind of stuff firsthand. And that was when I learned public choice theory as well and realized politics is not the answer. I'm going to get ruined if I try to do this. Because I moved to a particular district to set myself up to run for state office. And then, I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And I was there for almost 3 years. And I was like, I need to get out ASAP or it's going to suck me in. Because I saw the lifers. I saw a guy who was the chief of staff for the most liberal, big spending, big government person in the state Senate. He was her chief of staff. I walked in the office and I saw Atlas Shrugged on the shelf. And I said, whose book is that? He said, it's mine. I go, it is? He goes, yeah, I'm an objectivist. And I'm like, but you've been working for like 10 years for this. He just saw it as a job. It was like, this is just my job. Well, that's what I believe.
Yeah. Maybe believing that is just a hobby and doing this is just a job, and neither of them need to intersect.
It happens inevitably. You get a really cush job. You get tons of vacation. The pay is only so-so, but you get all these benefits, and you get lobbyists treat you like a god. I got free tickets to anything I wanted to because I was on the appropriations committee for a while over higher education. So every college in the state was like giving me tickets to football games. I didn't even tell anyone I was having a baby, and there was like a bunch of baby gifts stacked up on my desk when I came back from every college in the state because it was budget time, and I was the staff member on that committee, and they wanted more money. So like that, you just feel you get pampered by lobbyists. You get sucked in. So anyway, politics.
And that's you. I mean, if you at that level were getting that pampered, imagine someone at the really high levels who really has power.
Yeah, I was like a 20-something kid, a staff member in the state legislature, right? Like we're not even talking, DC and the federal level. So next I went and I worked for the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, and I was running college programs for them. I was running all around campuses in the state of Michigan, putting on events, bringing in John Stossel, bringing in different, guys to come and hold events and talk about free market ideas. And I started doing that in 06, 07, I can't remember. And it was like pulling teeth for the first year. Like, I think it was 07. Like these kids were like, what are you talking about? Free economy, free market. What? I don't know. 08 hits, Ron Paul happens. And if you weren't there, it is hard to explain for anybody today. 2008 on college campuses, like big, like University of Michigan, Michigan State University, Ron Paul was insane. Like you saw Ron Paul stuff everywhere. Everyone loved, tons of people loved him. I would host a booth. The previous year I'd host a booth as Students for a Free Economy. And people would be like, what is this? I don't understand. You have free stuff. The next year, 2008, Students for a Free Economy booth is just swarmed. And people were like, is this like free markets? Is this like that Ron Paul stuff? It was like insane what that guy did. And for whatever reason, it was like lightning in a bottle, the timing among college students. They suddenly started to care. They're like, I don't like Republicans. I don't like Democrats, but Ron Paul sounds kind of cool. Anyway, so I did that.
Really was like the perfect storm of it was the economic stuff at the right time where he happened to get on the stage at the right time. He probably wouldn't even be allowed on the stage nowadays. And I think a lot of people right now, I don't want to get too deep into another tangent, but who cares? I feel like there's a lot of people in the liberty movement. I'm not just picking on, the LP or caucuses or just, I think everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people are just kind of like looking for the next Ron Paul and just waiting for that next Ron Paul moment. And I think that's just a folly because you just can't recreate a perfect like confluence of events like that. You can create new paths and hope other things take off, but to try to recreate a Ron Paul moment, I don't think that's even possible.
No, I'm with you. It's always going to look different. That's a good segue. The next job I had, I worked for the Institute for Humane Studies. And this is a place that I knew all about their history, Baldy Harper, their founder. And I loved it. I loved their strategy. It was very much right out of Hayek's essay called The Intellectuals and Socialism, where, he basically lays out this. It's like the structure of production in the economy, but it's the structure of production for ideas and beliefs, basically. And Hayek essentially describes that you have like original thinkers, and then you've got like secondhand dealers in ideas, popularizers, who are like most professors or the intellectual class or people who get paid to talk or write. And then those kind of, basically trickle down to the general public. And so most people, like say John Locke's second treatise, his theories on property, most people don't know that. They wouldn't know what that is, but they believe things that come from it unknowingly because they're so ingrained. They have worked their way down through various levels of, from Locke's ideas through professors to teachers to textbooks to movies and artists. And now you grow up in America and the concept, my home is my castle, is somewhat ingrained in you, right? And so Hayek basically lays this out and he's like, look, we need to find the sort of the remnant of intellectuals and influencers. That word wasn't a thing back then, but secondhand dealers in ideas, he called them, which is both funny and somewhat derogatory. Aren't
we all secondhand dealers in ideas at the end of the day?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And basically help build a network of those types of people who value liberty and is going to ultimately reach the general populace. And so instead, I've always been the type to look for leverage in my career, like, okay, teach a man to fish, or, give a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach a man to fish, he eats for life. And I was like, well, I want to figure out how to raise the capital to build the factories, to make the rope that makes the nets that helps people catch millions of fish, right? I want to get way back in the structure of production, and I want to have a really high impact on what I'm doing. I want to make the world free. And so the idea of just like putting out billboards saying free markets are good. Okay, well, you're trying to directly change the populace's mind. That seems less effective than what if we could help support, identify, cultivate, and support the next Milton Friedman, let's say, who had free to choose, which was hugely powerful, he had huge influence, and that trickled down to people. And so that was kind of IHS's mission. And I think I learned along the way several interesting things, but one of them being, to your point, I don't think you can deliberately create the next Milton Friedman any more than you can deliberately create the next Ron Paul. And I would put Ron Paul, frankly, in the same bucket. I don't think he was Ron Paul qua politician was useless and ineffective. Ron Paul qua public personality, celebrity, was incredibly powerful at spreading these things. Now, it just so happens
he's kind of the inverse of what you were talking about earlier, where if you want to be a great politician, you're gonna be a bad person. Well, he was like the opposite. He's like the best person, and therefore not a great politician by the standard metrics.
As a politician, he didn't do anything. He didn't do anything to advance liberty through his votes and the things that politicians officially do. In our culture, politicians are treated like celebrities. So Ron Paul, the celebrity, I think had a really big impact in opening people's eyes up and things like that. But it's very dangerous if you say you want to impact people by having a big audience. Saying I'm going to build my audience by being a politician is probably the most dangerous route you can go, especially today because there's so many other routes available. But anyway, so with this mission with IHS, here's what happened. So they had this strategy, and they're like, well, let people. Academia is disproportionately influential on what people think, and people come out of there and they become journalists and all these other things, and those ideas trickle down. So let's create the next generation of free market academics, the next Hayeks and Friedmans and whatever, so that universities have these sort of, beacons of liberty in there. And that was IHS's mission. I helped them run programs, and then I helped them do fundraising before I eventually left to start Praxis. And what I saw happen was, around the time I left, right, I left to start an alternative to college, right? But I first pitched something like that to them. I was like, look, if we really want to help the next generation of, libertarian or classical liberal advocates, why are we confining it to finding and creating professors and helping them go through and get tenure and all this stuff? Because academia itself is dead. Why are we hitching our wagon to yes, that worked for Milton Friedman. Yes, Hayek won a Nobel Prize and that helped. The world has changed. It doesn't work that way now. And we have all these new tools. And I was like, Dan Carlin is influential than every history professor put together with his history podcast, right? Why are we not thinking about that type of thing? And why are we not? What about people like academia itself is just a corrupt, bureaucratic, mostly state-run, state-subsidized, state-regulated piece of shit. Why are we sending people in there? And I'd seen this happen. You find some young libertarian scholar, you give them, financial support and help them go get their degree and all this stuff. And then by the time they get tenure, they're just like a total squishy liberal because the things they had to do to be liked for 10 years. And they're like, oh, I can't say anything radical until I'm tenured. Well, if you're not saying anything radical, you're going to lose your radical, right? And so it corrupts them. And I'm like, this doesn't work, right? This is the blueprint for, oh, look, it happened on accident with Milton Friedman. Let's try to repeat that accident. And it's like, but now you have a totally different world. And so I think they completely missed the boat. Like Jordan Peterson has had more influence than every libertarian nonprofit combined in the last 10 years. And that's a complete missed opportunity, right? It's insane to me that, that there's that there were so many organizations. And again, I was a part of that world, the libertarian sort of nonprofit world with just millions, tens of millions of dollars over decades with the idea of spreading liberty. And what happens? They just are completely irrelevant. Well, this new age of sort of intellectuals outside of academia, intellectuals outside of think tanks, journalists outside of major journalism outlets. We were trying to place journalists at newspapers and professors at universities. Those are the two most dying industries that I can think of who are losing relevance, right? And so that's where I just came to this realization of I want to build the alternative I want to see. We don't need another white paper about why taxi cab cartels are a deadweight loss. We need more Ubers and Lyfts, right? Now, of course, those can get corrupted over time as well, like anything. But we don't need another white paper about, the Fed. We need more alternatives to the Fed. whether it's cryptocurrency or whatever, right? And so I was really always angry about higher education. I thought it was so stupid and corrupt from my own experience there. And I was like, instead of just talking about it and writing about it and raising money for programs that try to make college better by creating better professors, fuck that noise. I'm going to go build something that helps people escape from it altogether. And so I launched Praxis in 2013 to do just that.
And I did a whole, I think it was about 2 years ago that I interviewed Mitchell Earl about Praxis. We did a whole deep dive on that. So I will post the link to that interview in today's show notes so people can really go on a deep dive about Praxis. And that was the first business you founded. And then now you currently work for, or not work for, but you also founded Crash. So what exactly do you do with Crash that's different than what you're doing with Praxis?
Yeah, Crash is a crazy story and a crazy sort of illustration of the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. So, as Praxis is growing and doing really well, it's after the first couple of years, which were a brutal slog, finally started to grow and we're profitable and we're building the team. We're up to 15 team members. We're getting 120 students going through it every year and growing, and we're making good money. We're doing but I'm like, okay, this works. We've got it working. It's a pretty well-run machine, and I was not needed in the day-to-day, which is always I'm a big delegator. I'm a big I like to get things started and then hand them off. And so I had kind of set myself up to where the thing is running itself like a well-oiled machine. It's awesome. But I'm looking at it and I'm saying it's a very intense, rigorous program. There's a ceiling on how many people are able and willing to do something like that. Maybe it's 10,000 a year, but it's certainly not more than that. It's more likely, several thousand a year. I don't know. And we were doing, like I said, 100 and some and growing. I'm like, okay, I can see a linear growth path to get into hundreds and maybe thousands of students per year. And that's a great business. But I have this sickness called entrepreneurship. I get this itch and I'm like, but I want to do something for millions. I want to see if we can do something for millions of people. And if we can peel off one tiny bit of this Praxis experience, which is this really intense year-long program, and help millions of people just get a tiny bit of that flavor, there's something maybe we can do. And so I thought, if we can create a software platform that basically takes just the last part of the Praxis experience, which is the job hunt itself. And what we really do there is we teach people how to be their own credential. To say, look, in the signal economy, your college degree and your bullet points in your resume, they mean nothing now. I mean, it's so inflated, it's useless. It doesn't signal anything. If somebody applied to you for a job and it said, Bachelor's in Communications, University of Iowa, what does that mean? Does that signal anything to you about their value as a worker? It really doesn't. And so through Praxis, we would kind of teach people, be your own credential. And we were having them email videos and little pitch decks to companies. And they were getting hired for jobs that said 4-year degree and 3 years of experience required. And an 18-year-old with no degree and no experience was getting that job, sometimes over Ivy League students, literally. And they were doing that. No one was even asking about their education status because they showed them something more interesting right up front. They sent them a little video that said, I made a project for you. And suddenly people are like, I don't care about anything else. This is really interesting, right? And so I thought if we could create a platform that allows any job seeker to get on, and we kind of guide them through the process of just making a little interactive video pitch to send to companies instead of doing a traditional job application, then we could have something that can scale to millions of people, and it can completely transform the way the job market is done. Well, that hasn't happened. It's been 3 years. And what we found, and so what I did, I ended up raising, we split, first it started as a project of Praxis, but I split it into a separate company. I raised some venture capital, and this was new for me. I'm not a software guy. So I hired some software developers, and we started building this platform. And over the 3 years since, we've had so many different iterations, I can't even count, of the platform and the product itself. We've tried all these different angles. We tried a reverse jobs board where people are posting, I'm up for hire, and people can upvote it. We've tried this very elaborate profile that guides you through how to build it through this long process. We've tried to totally serve yourself. So many things. And what we found was basically, no matter what we did, we get some baseline of monthly users who would use Crash, absolutely crush it. I mean, there's an 80% response rate to using our video pitches when you're applying for a job versus 0.04% on a typical job application. Literally, it's just insane. But there's like a steady number of people that will use it every month and say, this is amazing. And then no matter how much we did with marketing and how many different angles we tried, we get a whole ton of other people to come on, open it up, and then never use it again, never return to it. And we would find when talking to these people are like, I've been looking for a job for 6 months. I've applied 300 times, gotten no calls back. I really need to get hired. And I'd be like, awesome. Let's go build a video pitch. It'll take you 20 minutes and then send that to 5 different companies. And they'd be like, okay, that sounds great. And then they don't do it. And then 3 months later, they're like, yeah, I still can't find a job. Maybe I'll do one of those pitches eventually. And what I realized was our product, to scale to the size we needed with the model we had, it required people to be better versions of themselves, essentially. It required people to put in more work, not less up front, right? So you can click apply 100 times and you feel like you're doing something. You're like, oh, good, I did my job hunting for the day. Taking 20 minutes to make a video pitch for someone is scary. It's a little different. And nobody wants to do it. Not enough people to make a nice little business, but not a venture-backed business. And I raise venture capital from investors, and they're not interested in a return. This is the model, right? The venture model has pros and cons. And the model is you either hit a home run or you go out of business eventually, right? Or whatever. It's not the same as like a bootstrap where you're like, hey, we're pulling in 20, 30, 50K a month. This is great. So anyway, kind of learning through those iterations. So we essentially just kept stripping back. And now the core of what Crash is, the core of what it is a daily email. Now we have all these services and products for job seekers, really effective, but we stripped everything down to make the only entry point into Crash a free subscription to the daily job hunt, which is a daily email that goes out. You can go to crash.co. You can subscribe right now. We launched this in July, and we're like, look, trying to get people on the platform to use this tool, it requires too much de-schooling, really. Like I underestimated how much the market, because the Praxis market is a tighter group of really motivated people. I underestimated how different the huge majority of people are, the huge majority of job seekers, rare types that we're working with in the Praxis program. People are like, they really, really need to get those poisonous ideas from their schooling out of their mind. Those ideas that I just follow the rules and then I just wait. And I just wait. And if I don't get a job, it's just luck or bad fortune or the economy. It's not up to me.
That pretty much is what we're taught in school. Follow these rules, memorize these things, do what we say, and just keep putting those applications out. Eventually you get the job, and you can go into debt for that house and go to debt for higher education, and for your kids' schooling, and then eventually you'll die. I mean, that's pretty much the pitch.
It's the obedience entitlement mindset, right? Obey, and then you're entitled to something. So like, okay, I obeyed. They told me get the best grades, get the best degree I could, have the best formatted resume. Now I'm entitled to a job. And then it doesn't happen. Well, you did everything right. It can't be your fault. I guess it's the economy. Maybe I'll go protest or some shit, right? And so we realized that mindset, like basically our target market needs to be deprogrammed before they can even use our product. And so we tried selling a course and then we tried coaching, which really are willing to do it when you get on a 20-minute call. Like in any 20-minute call, I'm not saying this to be cocky, but I'm saying it because it's so easy. In a 20-minute call, I can change the outcomes and change the life of almost any job seeker. Like it's not that hard, but to just crack away at some of those, but that's not a scalable model either. So we're like, what if we packaged up everything that we're all about into these tiny daily emails and said, we're going to give this away for free. Let's get every job seeker to get on this thing. And if we can chip away 0.01% every day at every person who reads this email, then the compounding effect of people being just a little more free, a little more alive, seeing themselves as, hey, I never thought of that. I could just email the hiring manager directly. That little change alone, all of a sudden they start thinking like an autonomous person. They unlock something that has this compounding effect. So we launched that in July. We're going to hit 100,000 subscribers on that probably in the next week, which has been amazing. And then a percentage of those are trickling in and using our tools and other things on the job hunt. But really, I see that as like, every morning, 10,000 people read what we put into those little emails. And they're just it's basically libertarian ideas, but it's specific to the job hunt. It's not talking about politics. It's just talking about self-ownership and responsibility and a sense of personal freedom and overcoming the things that hold you back. So that's been really exciting to see finally, after all these iterations, something that we boiled down so tight and so small that's working at a large scale. And if we can just kind of chip away a little bit, I think we did the whole company in reverse. We built this massive, really amazing product that nobody knew how to use. And then we kept stripping it down until we ended up with a newsletter. Again, I would start with a newsletter. This is the daily job hunt. Here it is. And then build a huge audience. And then once you got a huge audience, say, all right, now we're going to start rolling out some products for you to use little by little. I think I did it all backward. We're getting a little something going now.
Well, but you also kind of had to go through that to learn that. And I think it's such an important lesson about entrepreneurship and starting any project. And I speak to past and maybe present versions of myself when I say stuff like this. But I think a lot of us get held back sometimes on starting that new project or starting that company because we just don't have it all figured out. We don't have the perfect plan. Well, guess what? There's no perfect plan, and you're not going to start off with a perfect plan. Nobody does. The key is starting and just getting yourself in there. And yeah, maybe you got to have like 10 failures to see the thing that works and to lead you to the thing that works. And I think that this idea of, so many of us start off with, okay, I need the product that I'm going to sell for these dollars. I'm going to sell 10,000 of them. I'm going to make this much money. Maybe that can work, but especially today in the information age, being a valuable source of information, about a valuable source of motivation, whatever it may be, that is like such a higher level value than just selling one product or selling one course. And that's how you really are going to create a community. And I think that's really part of what you're doing at Crash is creating a community of support and people that are sort of share like-minded values. You're helping influence those values. And I think a lot of people can just learn from your story about this, that you don't need to have it all figured out. You don't necessarily need to have a standard business model. If you have knowledge or motivation or about anything, really, just start putting it together into some kind of package. You will find like-minded people because as weird as any of us might be, there's other weirdos out there that are into the same stuff we're into. So, express that and you will find those people eventually. Now, it might take a long time. I mean, I've been plugging away on this podcast for 8 years, but we've developed just an incredible, solid community of people here. And there's just, you can't really put a number on what that is. Oh, did I lose you again? I think I lost you again. I did. You're very frozen.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's funny. Crash and Praxis have sort of opposite origin stories in a way. Praxis was like, I had this idea. I knew I needed to do it. Whether it failed or not, I needed an answer to whether it could work. And so I just started bootstrapping it myself. And I'm basically doing every single day, as long as I could do one thing to move it forward, I would just keep going. And I initially was like, well, I guess I'll need to raise a bunch of money. And I thought, well, I don't need to unless I literally get to a point where I can't do anything else without money. And that bootstrapper mindset was so valuable because it's like, okay, well, is there one more thing I can do today? And I was doing this on the side at first while I had my other job, and then I quit it. And I was like, I just need to get customers. And so I'm like taking it an inch at a time every day, doing something. The success of Praxis attracted a really top-notch, incredible investor. He cold emailed me and was like, hey, I like what you're doing. Let's chat. And we started chatting. And he's like, what could you do to reach millions of people and make $1 billion company? And I was like, well, I've got these ideas for this platform I've been toying around with. And basically he's like, I want to invest in this. And so I took on the investment. And so now I have a big name investor and a big chunk of money and a big vision. And I got to go hire developers and go build this thing. And so I'm thinking I got to build a really big thing. And I think when I look back on it, that caused me to stray from what I do best and how I operate best, which is like a grinder and a content creator. Those are kind of the things that I do really well. I'm in recruiting people to like help me out as like interns and volunteers while we're in that really early stage and we got nothing and we're really hungry. And that's kind of where I work at my best. But because I had success with Praxis, I attract this investment. And so now I'm like, I'm the dude with the hot new investor and a bunch of money to work with. And I changed my MO. And I think I learned the hard way that with or without outside money, I needed to do it the same. I needed to start it the same way. Okay, first, let's build an audience. That doesn't really cost anything. Let's start putting out content every day. Let's start to build up rapport and figure out what our target market's all about. Then let's start to make the smallest version of a product we can and see if we can get anybody to pay us anything for it. And then if that works, let's make it a little bigger and see if we can get more people to pay us more for it. And I thought, well, I got money, I can cheat code it. I can build an incredible thing behind the scenes and then release it all at once and have this huge market and this huge, and like, I didn't think that's what I was doing because I've read the lean startup and all that stuff, but I think that was what I was doing. And I think it's just a great example of how if you have a lot of money up front for your entrepreneurial idea, you'll waste it. You will. Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't have it, but you're going to waste a lot of it. And the longer you can go as lean as possible, the more you learn and the less likely to waste resources you are. And so, like, the incentive structure you face is always stronger than your own will and wisdom. If you say, I've got really strong willpower and I'm really wise about resource allocation with my business, okay, great. If I say, here's $5 million, no strings attached, make your business really big in the next year, we're going to be a way worse business person, right? Doesn't matter how good your willpower and your wisdom are. You're going to lose it because you don't have an incentive to. You don't have to now. You don't have to. So I think a little bit of that mixed in too. So I mean, just learning through the process, and like you said, like I wouldn't undo it, or you know, I don't want to say I wouldn't do it any other way because like I'm like, oh, there's all these things I would do differently,
Sure.
but I had to go through it. I had to go through it to learn it. As
I had to do a couple of years of shitty podcasts, you know, like to not that, man.
Yes,
opinion. Some people might say
I tell everybody that. People will be like, I want to launch a podcast. What should the topic be? What kind of mic do I need? Should I bring on guests? What should the format? And I'm like, until you have released 20 episodes, those questions are irrelevant. Get 20 episodes out the door. That's all that matters. Once you've done that, all those questions become relevant. Until then, they're just excuses. Just get them out.
And the questions start to answer themselves. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing too. Like a lot of these questions, you might have ideas about them, but I think one thing I've learned so much from podcasting that probably applies to really any business eventually is the feedback guides where you go. So like the feedback that you got from Crash, like exactly what you're doing wasn't working, and you kind of delve into this other format. And you know, this Lions of Liberty, this show has evolved not exactly to cater to the audience per se. It's kind of a back and forth pull, I guess, because a lot of it's just like our own motivations and how we're seeing things. But you know, these questions tend to answer themselves if you just get started. And getting started is where so many people get stuck. I mean, I was stuck for months. I was like, oh, I'm going to start this podcast, and then I just didn't for months. I bought a microphone. I had like the stuff. I just didn't do it. And it was only when Stefan Kinsella, I was like chatting with him one day. He's like, you know, it'd be easier if we just talked about this on a call. And I was like, well, we're already having a video call. I guess I should record it and start the podcast. And so that's kind of how it started. But yeah, I mean, it can be hard to make that first jump, that first leap into actually starting the thing, because then you've actually put something on the line. Then you've actually put yourself into something, and there's a danger there. There's a danger of it's almost a guarantee nowadays. Like someone's going to make fun of you on the internet. Someone's going to call you stupid. Like YouTube comments are just like the death knell, and you're going to go through all that. So there is a certain vulnerability you have to put yourself out there too, but it's all a necessary part of the process.
Or worse yet, nobody pays any attention at all.
Well, yeah, worse yet. I guess you're lucky if people are talking shit about it.
Right. Yeah, you know, and that's a great point, because that brings me kind of full circle to, that is basically my philosophy on advancing liberty, on making the world a freer place. The same thing you just said about business, that you got to learn it by doing it. It will emerge as you get your hands dirty and try to solve those problems. So one field experiment is worth thousands of thought experiments, right? It's like we can sit around and talk about trolley problems and all these made up ideas, or we can go out in the real world and say, what's a real problem that I can solve? And I felt like that. It was like all these debates, and I was reading all these libertarian takes on higher education. Well, it's a signal that you're buying, and maybe the subsidy is this, and then everybody would debate, well, you know, it's not really entirely statist. The university system is quasi-private, and then people would debate how private is it, how free market is. And then I'm like, well, I just think it does a bad job at preparing people for the workforce. And I think for less time and money, they could do it better under a different model. If I think that, I need to go and try that. Like, what's the point of debating it? Let's go try it in the real world. Now I get to say, when I debate with or whatever about the employability value of the college degree, I get to say, no, all of your theoretical arguments you put together on signaling theory, you're actually wrong. It's not a valuable employability signal. And he'll say, but I've asked employers and they've said it is. And I'll say, well, you're an economist. You should know the difference between stated and revealed preferences. I've asked employers too, hey, do you require a degree for this role? They all say yes. Then I've sent them 10 people's pitches without degrees and they all get interviews and they get hired. So I can tell you from real world experience, I have helped thousands of people without the proper credentials get jobs that supposedly require them. I can tell you that degree is not doing the heavy lifting in people's hiring decisions. They don't even necessarily know that, but their actions tell that. And I have the proof because I'm in the real world and I'm learning it and I'm adjusting on the fly and I'm figuring out what does matter to them and how can I sell them something that matters more to them than even they themselves know how to put into words. Like, that's where it gets exciting. And that's how you build a free world, is not debating about which version of a private property society is better. Go freaking build it and see what you can make work.
Yeah, I've had jobs like that say college degree required. And then I found out, getting to know my coworkers, and like about half of them don't have that thing. Like, but it said required. No, they just went into the workforce, gained some experience, and their experience mattered so much more than some kid that showed up with a degree without it. Even if it says so in their company, guidelines or what have you, that's
and if they
a guideline.
If they were serious about that, they would go investigate. Because literally I know people that have just they had a degree on their resume and to see if anyone would check it. And no one does, because it's obviously not doing the heavy lifting of letting them know who's valuable to work with.
They might call your references or your employers, but they're not going to look at your college. Like they're just not.
Right. And if a degree was that valuable of a signal, then it'd be easier to just call a college professor and be like, hey, or a college graduation office and say, hey, people who have come from your school are so reliably valuable. Fill these 5 roles for me. Just send me 5 people because I can trust that if they graduated from there, they're going to be good. Nobody would ever do that in a million years because it's an incredibly weak signal. So anyway, that's just one example of, I think, how liberty works in the real world. I mean, this is straight out of Hayek's explanation of, the use of knowledge in society and the way that you learn through doing it. I mean, and again, this is right out of John Hasness, The Obviousness of Anarchy. The fact that we can debate all these theoretical problems that would happen in a free society, or should we gradually reduce the state versus, meanwhile, the state is just growing while we're debating how to theoretically reduce it, right? Instead, if you get out there and say, I'm going to pick one problem that maybe it's caused by the state, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a problem that civil society would be better if it was solved. And I'm going to go solve it in a peaceful way, in an enterprising way. And I'm going to make a profit in the process. Try that over and over and over again. And if you succeed at that, you will have done more to make the world a freer, better place than any number of books and debates coming up with the final knock-dead argument about whether a stream that you pour something in that pollutes my land is, you're liable for that, and whether a private court can handle that, right? Now, I love that stuff. I'm an intellectual. I nerd out on it.
Sure.
But you're not going to solve it unless you start experimenting.
I've made a name for hosting debates about the theoretical here on Lions of Liberty, but I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. So still come listen to the debates, but realize that that's kind of like the fun thing. That's not the same as the application of just going out there and working and seeing.
Yeah, and let those debates. I mean, that's what led me to entrepreneurship. It took me 10 years before I eventually started a business, but it was my obsession and my passion with those things. How does the world change? How do you make it more free? When there are examples of bad policies that went away, like prohibition, how did that happen? What are the dynamics of social change? How do you reduce the role of the state and increase the role of freedom in this area, And I would study it and I would think about it. And eventually I kind of connected the dots in one particular area of kind of education and career. And I saw that there's an opportunity to go and test this out and go try it. And so this is not an anti-intellectual or anti-debates or ideas argument at all. It is in addition to that, go out and test it. Go out and test it out. Try stuff, try your little, whatever, freedom communities, or your business that sells, whatever, all of it. Get your hands dirty, because we're going to discover a lot more, and play with technology. We're going to discover a lot more ways to expand freedom if we're dabbling as we're discussing.
For sure. Well, I think that's a great way to wrap things up, Isaac. Really appreciate you coming on the show, working through the internet issues and all that fun stuff. So much appreciated. Before we wrap up, just let everybody know all the places they can find everything you're doing, what you're doing with the podcast, feel free to plug away on anything you got.
Sure. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the podcast because I actually love it, but I don't do it regularly anymore. I used to for several years. Now it's just kind of like randomly whenever I feel like talking or interviewing somebody. So, but you can find Isaac Moorehouse podcast. I mean, I'm on Twitter, and isaacmorehouse.com is my website. You can find links to Crash and Praxis there. If you Google me, I mean, Isaac Moorehouse is a fairly unusual name, and you'll find my stuff wherever. So, and you can email me too, isaac@crash.co. I'll respond. I'm like a freak, zero inbox. I respond to pretty much all emails within 24 hours max. So I will respond if you have questions and you want to chat.
All right, kitty cats, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Isaac Moorehouse, a guy that's been on my quite long short list of people to interview for quite some time here. And even though he is really, I recorded that interview last year, and it's kind of one of the last interviews of what you might call the old era of Lions of Liberty. Isaac certainly does fit in more, you might say, with the new era of Lions of Liberty that is forthcoming in a couple weeks here with, well, I guess you'll just have to wait and find out. Let's put it that way. But do stay tuned. There are great, grand, wonderful things coming to Lions of Liberty this year, and how much we grow, how much we continue to grow is going to be largely contingent on how much support from our listeners we have. As I mentioned, there's a few ways you can support us. You can also just go to our website. There's other ways to support us there as well, through cryptocurrency, through PayPal, if you just want to do one-time donations. But we also have, of course, our Patreon, patreon.com/Lions of Liberty, as well as our locals as well, lionsofliberty.locals.com. Patreon, you do have more options. There are more different kind of perks you have, whereas locals is basically just it's a little bit of a social community, social network kind of thing too. But we're just starting to get some people into there, so we haven't really built up that aspect of it too much. But you can get all of the content, all of the bonus content, all of the live streams, all of the extra shows we do, like Conspiracy Corner, Brian's Good Morning Bleep Head, Degenerate Gamblers, Conspiracy Corner, all that fun stuff you can find over either on locals or Patreon. So you get the content either way. Patreon, we just have more tiers and more options, more perks, like our Nittany level, where you can produce an episode of this show once per year, our Aslan level, where you get a mention like I'm about to do right now for our friends Nate and Charlie over on Good Morning Liberty. These guys crush it 5 days a week, and they really know how to talk about the ideas of liberty, filtering it sort of through the daily news kind of thing, something that I don't do at all. I am so behind on news, I hardly ever know what's going on until I tune into either, of course, Brian on Wednesdays with Electric Liberty Land, but really the GMF guys, that's Good Morning Bleephead, that's Brian's Patreon show, but no, better than the GML guys. There we go, Good Morning Liberty. So do check them out, please, my friends Nate and Charlie, who are longtime fans and longtime supporters of this show. Check them out at their still very awesome URL, BernieLies.com. That's all I got for this week, kitty cats. Until next time, don't forget to
live long and live free.